Good morning, folks, and thank you very much for the lovely introduction by Brian and Bruce. It's actually been 13 years since I've been at SecTor, so things are a little bit different. The conference is certainly much bigger. It was actually in the same building, though, which is kind of cool. So it's lovely seeing this whole space getting bigger and full of people, and very thankful for all of y'all coming out today. Kind of a quick introduction. You already mentioned it, but a lot of folks know me from my work in Metasploit, effectively writing exploits and giving them to script kiddies for 15 years. But to give you a sense of my background, the whole time I was doing Metasploit work, I was also doing other jobs. I was working for different startups. I was either a sysadmin, a consultant, a CSO for a while. At one point, Rapid7 said, since you're putting a target on our back, you have to be our CSO going forward. I'm like, OK, fine. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about today is a combination of those, looking at it from an offensive security lens, but also looking at it from somebody who's had to build the security program, build the defense, and then work with customers who've done the same thing. So long story short, I love building security tools. I love doing, building products and companies and stuff. It's a lot of fun. Currently doing that right now at runZero, and I love security research and open source. So I love to be able to, take the stuff and work on every day and get it out there in a way that other people can try it, test it, improve it, and so on. So going back about 20 years ago, I was doing pen test work for credit unions, large financial orgs, but the friendly kind, the credit unions, not the banks. And there's this gentleman at this organization in Florida that we're doing an assessment for named Dave, and Dave was fantastic. He had worked his way up from the mailroom to being head of IT. He knew everybody by name. He knew who all their kids were. He'd walk through the hallway and just kind of call out down the line, and just was very much part of the family at the credit union. He just rolled out new security policies, and was really excited about how those new security policies would do during a security assessment. And he was very excited about the assessment itself. He wanted to see OK, I've done all this work. I've had all my team set stronger passwords. We've done all this lockdown stuff internally. How will it actually end up? Will we actually see an improvement on our assessment from last time? And that kind of set the stage. So of course, the very first thing you do in a security assessment is, you pop the domain, and that takes all of 10 seconds. And then once you have the domain, you go crack all the passwords. And back then, the tool we used for it was Loftcrack or John the Ripper. But of the 3,000 users, we cracked basically 3,000 passwords, except for the randomized service ones. They all cracked out pretty quickly. And typically, there were some long passwords. You'd see they weren't all really short ones. There's a minimum password policy in place with at least 8 characters and so on. You still see trends pop out. Oftentimes, you'd see Dolphins 2004 or Summer 2003. And just things that are typically either common for that organization, common for that location in the world based on sport teams and so on. Something jumped out here that was not that, and it was pretty disturbing. And I had to finally take Dave kind of to side and say, you know what? Most of the passwords here are some version of FU. So nobody liked this policy so much, they all got together and decided to have various passwords that are FU Dave, Dave FU, Dave sucks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So of the 3,000 passwords we cracked, at least 200 were some variant of talking smack about Dave. And Dave was not a fan of this. He kind of felt like this was a gut blow. The people he was friends with really, betrayed him, and he was not very happy about this. And so for me, it's kind of an opening, eye-opening moment. It's wow, he spent all this time trying to make a better security policy for these folks, and they turned around and turned it against him in a lot of ways. And they went the exact opposite. And these passwords weren't even great passwords. They weren't even secure passwords. They were just really mean passwords. So all said and done, about a month after the security assessment finished, Dave quit. Dave walked away. He'd been there for 12 years, and he was done. So this stuff can have real consequences. So when it comes to security policies, password policies, they're much more than policy failures. They end up alienating people. They can create resentment. They can make us less secure because your team is not bought in. You really need everybody in the organization to be excited about improving security. You can't just say you must be compliant and that's that. You need everyone to be bought in about why. If they don't understand why you need to do things a certain way, well, they're not going to believe in it. They're not going to do it. They're not going to follow it. So you really need to make sure that everything you're doing in a security policy is, you're including the why as part of that with your discussion. Otherwise, you're not going to get the buy-in and the trust. And if you have good rules, that'll build mutual trust. They'll say, wow, you know what you're doing because you set this rule. We told you why we did the rule. And then you actually get a lot more support for your policies at that point. So what I want to do today is talk about some of those rules. What are the rules that have been driving cybersecurity? Which ones work? Which ones haven't? What's changed in particular? And just jump right into it. So first off, I'm going to pull the thread on passwords a little bit. Passwords are just one of the things that are in security, whether you want them to be or not. And the rules are always changing. If you go back about 15 years or so, folks would often say that you want to change your password like you change your underwear, or like you change your socks or your diapers, depending on where you were. And they would say your passwords must be really long. They must be really complicated. They must be unique. Also, you can never write them down, and you have to change them all the time. And like that doesn't work. Human beings are not particularly good at memorizing really long, complicated strings, especially when you force them to change that constantly in the background. And the justification for it was, well, I'm your employer. I'm your employer. I can tell you what to do. Like, there's only one password you have to really care about, and that must be your work password. So you can grin and bear it for this one long password. That was generally the justification on the employer side. The problem is everybody treats people that way. Like your bank will treat people that way, your employer will treat people that way. End of the day, these folks are being asked to memorize and secure these random passwords for 10, 20, 30 different logins. And of course, that doesn't work because we also told them they can't write them down. So this failed in a whole bunch of ways. It was trying to solve a bunch of problems at the same time. It was trying to solve people sharing passwords. This is in the early days of 2000s. People were still, generally sharing passwords at work for, federal login accounts, things like that. They weren't having per-user passwords. The idea is you wanted to prevent the password from getting exposed to an observer. So you don't put it on a sticky note, don't put it on your desk. I used to walk around doing physical security assessments, and we'd flip up people's keyboards. You look in their desk looking for the password, and that was one of the dings you would get, is writing down your password in a way that was visible in your workplace. And the idea is you want to make it both difficult for someone to guess that password online, so actually trying to log in as your user repeatedly, but you also want to make it really difficult to offline crack it. And that means somebody's able to download the hashed encrypted versions of your password and then brute force those as well. So trying to do all those things at the same time doesn't work very well. And you end up with these like nonsense rules for how you go about doing that. What made things worse is that a lot of the technical requirements that led to these rules in the first place, like why do you need a password longer than 8 characters? Or why do you need a password longer than 14 characters in Windows? The initial technical reasons why those rules were in place no longer mattered, but we're still kind of cargo culting those rules from before into new policies. So Bitwarden's got this great little password strength meter. It says it'll take centuries to crack this password and weeks to crack this other one. It's all nonsense, right? If someone's captured your password, they know your password right away. It's not going to take them centuries. And there's many ways you can brute force even long passwords in a quicker period of time. So kind of talking about the technical reasons why passwords were so bad. If you're used to old school Unix machines, they use something called DES as the encryption algorithm for passwords. It was broken a long time ago. It's been not really secure for a very long time. Yet you still see systems that use DES in some portion. Even Microsoft Windows still uses DES behind the scenes for landman hashing. So the thing about DES encryption is that everything after the 8th character would just get thrown away. So you have a very long password that's 15 characters, 20 characters. It doesn't really matter. It's only the first eight bytes that really matter. And so a lot of early technology platforms, like Yahoo, for example, would truncate your password after 8 bytes and not really treat anything after that as part of the password. And eventually, folks figured that out and fixed it. But it happened that way because of this older Unix rule, and those rules just kind of get stuck onto the policy forever, and so on. So Windows, for example, will actually split your password into 2 7-byte passwords and store each one separately encrypted with LangMan, which is basically DES, in addition to your MD4 full password hash. In a lot of legacy systems, like for example, if you're a credit union, you're using a MPIX operating system, like an old mainframe running on like an HP 3000, you can't have a single special character anywhere in your password, or that whole system will break. So these all seem archaic and kind of funny, but even in modern systems, can't have more than 72 characters in the password in some cases. And this is really funny because it broke in the case of Okta. I don't know if anyone else saw the Okta news from a couple years ago where they had a 52-character username problem. And what's funny about this is that the way that Okta was hashing passwords is they were taking a 20-byte user ID, then they're taking your username, and then they're taking your password and putting all that to a hash. However, the password hash that they ran was bcrypt, and bcrypt throws away everything after the byte number 72. So if you have 20 bytes prefix, you had a 52-byte username, you had no bytes for your password. So effectively, you had a no-byte password if you had a 52-byte username. And then any variant from like 52 bytes all the way down would truncate your password with the same number of bytes on the bcrypt side. So even like modern systems these days using modern password algorithms can end up with these weird technical rules around it. We've also seen cases like mobile devices. They have really poor password hashing choices because your phone just don't have enough oomph for it. If you're running an older version of Android, you can't run like a 10,000 runs at PBKDF2. You can't run these really strong scrypt large memory requirements to hash it. You have to do something that's compatible with all the devices your users use. And then lastly, web applications. Every web app has its own weird restrictions on what passwords it'll accept, and usually for really dumb reasons. Like the users had a SQL injection bug a long time ago. Now they restrict single quote characters. But they probably fixed that bug a long time ago and still didn't basically allow single quote characters. So we end up with all these really bizarre restrictions on our password choices, and that's results in kind of the odd policies we have today. So something that's kind of fun, if you're curious about how a provider stores your password, try setting a password that's 9 characters, and then try logging in with the first 8. Now try logging with setting a 73-byte password, try logging with this first 72, and so on. You can start getting a feel for like how the provider actually stores your password. In worst case, if they come back and say you can't have a single quote character, you know you're in trouble. You know they're probably storing the clear text password at that point. You want to run away screaming from whoever that is. There you go. So what are the features of passwords? Well, they tend to look a lot like what's in your pocket. Your cell phone these days is effectively kind of the future of what passwords look like. Now, when you're taking your phone out and unlocking the PIN number, why is that more secure than just a straight up password? Well, what you're doing is you have what's called a secure enclave. You actually have a chip on your cell phone that's entire job is to protect a large secret key. And it does that by letting you type in a PIN number or doing biometric unlock or something like that. Now, the only reason that's secure is because if you try to send a whole bunch of PIN requests to your phone, it'll lock you out and then burn the chip. If you type in this wrong password 10 different times, well, it'll actually burn the secret out of memory and you lose the secret forever. So this is now kind of the new standard. Devices that have a built-in security enclave of some sort with a fairly short, user-friendly password that when you try to brute force them, they straight up just burn the key and there's no way around it. Now, these can also go horribly wrong. So there's some great research this year at DEF CON and Black Hat that talked about how to break BitLocker by attacking the Windows recovery environment. And that was a good example of how it doesn't matter if you've got a strong PIN and a TPM and all this stuff. If your recovery environment has these vulnerabilities, you can basically backdoor it there anyways and still get your keys. So the recommendation there is if you're using something like BitLocker or FileVault, you definitely want to be set up to require a PIN number when you boot. If you have BitLocker configured on your Windows machine, but you don't have a PIN number, it doesn't really save you very much because there's going to be many different ways to crack that. So for example, if let's say today your laptop is stolen, you've got BitLocker and TPM, but you do not have a boot PIN, someone could take that laptop and throw it on a shelf and just wait 2 years, wait for the next fun exploit to come out, and then pop the machine on the network, compromise the machine through that exploit, and off you go. So you can just kind of wait for future vulnerabilities to help you unlock these devices. And law enforcement does that. If law enforcement captures hardware equipment that they can't break that moment, they just stick it in a box and wait. And 3 or 4 years later, they find a new vulnerability they can use, they tackle it, they use the vulnerability, get access, and so on. So if you don't have a PIN during startup, that's generally a problem. That generally indicates that some future attack can be used against you. Even these days with hard drives, most hard drives have what's called a secure erase feature these days, especially for SSDs, and it's really fast. So you have a 4 terabyte hard drive, and you can push one button that erases the entire 4 terabytes. Like, what does that tell you about it? It's not going to actually write 4 terabytes of data really quickly. What it's going to do instead is it's going to erase the temporary key on the device. And so when you do secure erase on a SSD, for example, even some spinning hard drives, it's just wiping the key in memory and then saying, well, the rest of it's encrypted, therefore it's been logically wiped. So these are the kind of standards you see going forward, is that folks are going to be using really short pins with enclaves, and you have these self-encrypting, self-decrypting drives that have the ability to basically protect their own secret keys. So these days, the rule for passwords is a little bit different. Passwords must be unique still, because you don't want to have a compromise of one website resulting in all your passwords being stolen. They need to be stored in a password manager, because if you're not storing a password manager, unless you're a savant, you're not going to be able to record 9,000 16-character passwords, right? You really want to use one secure thing to store everything and have a strong password for that one thing, unlock it as needed, get the passwords you need, and so on. These should be expensive to guess. So when a password is being stored to disk, to a database, whatnot, you want to store it in a way that it's really slow for someone to try to authenticate to repeatedly. So the way we do that is what's called a cost function. So when you're encrypting something with bcrypt, Argon2ID, scrypt, et cetera, there's a cost function that's part of the hash. You say, I want to do 10,000 operations of this, or 20,000 operations. And for some algorithms like scrypt, it actually not only sets how much CPU time that goes into it, but how much memory you need. And what this does, it makes it really difficult for them to crack on GPUs or on ASICs. It makes it very expensive from a hardware perspective to break the password. So you want to use something that's very expensive to crack effectively. That'll slow down brute force attacks. And either way, you need to have MFA. So you don't have multi-factor authentication of some sort, whether it's a hardware token, a WebAuthn, something like that. Your password doesn't really mean very much because something can happen to your password, they can still break in. So you always want MFA in place, but you don't want SMS. So SMS is an example of something where it's always kind of used as a fallback for authentication, and it's usually the weakest way to get access to someone's account is to forget their password and then send the reset code to SMS, and then just do a SIM swap attack on them, get your key, etc. So there's ways you can defend against that. You can go with a cell provider that actually prevents SIM swaps or does a better job of protecting it. There's a few special ones out there these days. But typically, if you're using like a Google Fi or another MVCC, they'll actually protect you much better for a SIM swap versus your typical large carrier. So another thing you can do is just avoid passwords entirely. You can say, I don't want to deal with passwords again. There's these cool things now called passkeys, where effectively it's a web authn key with a resident key, and your key, your password is effectively tied to this authentication key, and it's tied to your OS, tied to your platform, whatever it is. The challenge with passkeys, though, is they kind of centralize passwords to with one of these large providers. So Windows Hello will be your passkey provider, or Apple will with their phone, or your watch will be your passkey provider. So the downside of these, of course, is you may not always have that passkey with you. You may have to enroll more than one passkey. So while passkeys are a great way to avoid passwords, they typically aren't the best choice in some cases because they require bringing something else with you. So the part about passwords that folks never really test very well is the recovery part. So what happens if you lose your password? Well, you have to go through this recovery flow. Well, what does that flow look like? Well, in most cases, all it's going to do is send your password to your email address. So if your email address isn't particularly secure, well, it doesn't really matter what your password was. Someone could just break into your email account, use that to reset your password, and off they go. So you have to make sure that when you do these different attempts to lock down your identity, your trust, et cetera, that all of the root of your trust, all of your email addresses, all of your SMS phone numbers, if necessary, are really well protected. Otherwise, that's going to be the easiest point to break into your account. So the challenge with password managers, of course, especially if you use a password manager to store your MFA key, is you're putting all your eggs in one basket. If someone's able to compromise your OnePass, your LastPass, that's it. They're done. They don't really need anything else. Your life is basically over. So something to try is like, just test the unlock process, test the recovery process, set up an account and be like, great, on Saturday, I'm going to walk through all the processes to figure out, can I still get into my account if I lose the password? And find out what you need to have done instead. Okay, well, I want to turn off SMS, or I want to print out recovery keys, and then actually test it. So I can tell you the number of folks that have great backup recovery policies, but never tested their password policies is astronomical. So next area we talk about is perimeters. So kind of network perimeters. In the old days, we would talk about networks having kind of a hard candy shell with a soft, chewy center. That's just typically how attackers thought of networks. You'd have all your crunchy firewalls on the outside, then you have all your kind of chewy domain controller stuff on the inside. And that was basically how we looked at security. The outsides were where you put all your effort and your time and your money, and the insides were basically a no man's land where anything goes. It would take very small amount of time for someone getting access to your internal network before they could take over your entire environment once they're already inside. The typical model for security looked kind of like a medieval city. You had walls, you had moats, you had doors, you had all these different things. You're trying to force the attacker to go through these different things, and then eventually they get to the inside. But then once they're inside, there's really not a lot stopping them from moving around. And this is pretty standard. We've been trying to fix this model for 20 years now, and we still haven't really done a good job of it. What we've often done is actually just moved it down a little bit. So now every laptop is its own kind of mini city. Every device, every cluster has its own layers of both difficult security and weak security internally. So I want to go through a couple examples of where we've seen that fail in the wild. And this is a little bit of a jump to the right here, but the idea is this picture is from Shodan. It's a picture of all the favorite icons of all the devices on the internet through the web services. And the question you want to ask yourself here is, what device shouldn't be here? So based on the size of the icon, this tells you what that device is. And the bigger the icon, the more prevalent that particular device is on the internet. So one thing that's interesting about this is that there's a really dangerous combination of ISP-provided routers that are on by default, and devices that automatically cut holes in the firewall and port forward their traffic to themselves. So for example, if you go buy a brand new Amcrest security camera that was covered by Rob King in his talk about rebranded to Whois, for example, that camera will automatically talk to your firewall, try to cut a hole in it, and port forward admin traffic from the internet back to itself. So if you happen to have a ISP-provided router for your business, for your home, and then you plug in one of these IP cameras, like doing absolutely nothing else on your own will result in that camera being exposed to the internet directly. Like you didn't have to go configure it; it's on by default. So this shows up right here. Obviously, this large icon in the center, you see the big circle with kind of gray on it. That's a Hikvision or Hikvision camera model, and is the most exposed web device on the planet. Not because people intentionally did it, but because of this combination of UPnP-enabled firewalls and this behavior of these devices to automatically cut holes through the firewall and port for themselves through. So this type of device is, the camera is one example of that, but you also see this happen with IP cameras, DVRs, media servers, file servers. If you recognize some of the devices here in this icon list, you'll see things like your Synology, you'll see things like your Plex server. You also see a lot of devices that are intended to be outside. So for example, Fortinet, you can see the icon there. Fortinet web logins are apparently, often visible to the internet. Now, you don't necessarily want the internet being able to log into your Fortinet firewall, but this is what it means. This kind of shows you that that is actually a common exposure. So the next thing I want to talk about is a little interesting. So this is kind of a really bizarre bug. I was doing internet-wide scanning stuff back in 2014. One thing I like to do when I'm running an internet-wide scan, so covering all of IPv4, maybe a little bit of v6, is the first thing I'll do is start running something called the responder. So effectively, it listens on a bunch of different ports. It listens on port, 139, 445. It listens on TFTP. It starts a web server. It creates all these listening services on my machine that I'm running the scan from. And then as I start running the scan, you start seeing kind of connections coming back to you. Devices start starting to poke you back. So if you start scanning the internet saying, hey, are you running a web server? Oftentimes these devices will then connect back to you and ask you things like, hey, what are you running, and so on. So it's kind of like a mini hackback, if you will. One thing that was really surprising, though, is that within minutes of running this large scan in 2014, I started getting this massive flood of credentials, like tons and tons and tons of passwords, all through SMB, all on port 445 coming inbound. And what's really interesting is all the usernames of these credentials start off with the same two letters, PA. So it's PA, PAN, PAN user ID, PAN OS. It's like, what is this stuff? Why are we getting all these weird credentials coming in? Well, it ends up there's a feature built into Palo Alto Network's firewalls where it's called user ID. And the idea is that if there's something nefarious going on inside your network, your firewall will actually see that traffic and then go try to log into that attacker's machine to figure out who's currently logged in, try to assign that to a user ID. Unfortunately, people had it misconfigured so that instead of connecting just to your internal network, it would connect to anybody on the internet. So the punchline here is like you could port scan someone's Palo Alto firewall from the internet, and it would then give you the domain controller password automatically. And it was ridiculous. It affected a huge number of customers, lots of Fortune 500s. I had this giant list of customers I was calling down, trying to say, please turn this thing off. Here's how it works. We spent all this time writing a joint white paper with Palo Alto, with Microsoft, with Rap7 at the time, trying to convince people, like, here's how you can do it better. Here's how you protect the credentials. And it never really went away. Like a year later, I still found 3,000 of them. And I couldn't figure out why. We'd done so much outreach trying to tell people about it. Well, ends up some of the vendors just kind of sat on their hands and didn't tell anyone about it. Like they buried the advisory. They didn't make a lot of noise about it. So just about 2 months ago, I went and did another scan just for fun, and I still found some out there. Not only did I find some Palo Altos still having the same behavior, but I found a bunch of WatchGuard firewalls doing the same thing. So sometime in the last couple of years, WatchGuard's SSO agent now also connects back to any device that's scanning you. So this is really bad behavior because if you're an attacker, you're now convincing the firewall to give you a login that you can like relay, that you can crack, that'll let you take over the network entirely. And the firewall itself is doing it. The device that's supposed to be protecting you is the thing actually creating the exposure here. The thing about these attacks, though, is that when they fixed it, they only fixed it for the outside network. If you're onside the internal network of one of these companies, like let's say you join the Wi-Fi guest network, or you're able to get access to an internal network and start scanning and poking around, this still works. If you still have a Palo Alto set up with user ID, it's still going to authenticate to you. It's still going to give you credentials. So all these attacks still work internally, even if they don't work externally. Now, keep in mind, like this may not be a big deal because there's 5 other ways you can steal passwords internally. You could just basically run a server overnight, wait for your Tenable scanner to scan you. It's going to scan you with authenticated credentials, take those credentials, turn around, relay those, get an attack, etc. But typically, the easiest way to take over someone's internal environment is just to wait 20 minutes for a login to come by and use that, and that's it. So we haven't really moved the needle very much in that sense. Something really interesting, though, about the Palo Alto vulnerability, though, is at the time I was running Rap7's security research. We were the ones naming the advisories, so R7 2014, 16, 17, 13, 14, etc. For some reason, R7 2014, 16 has been deleted from the internet. It is no longer Rap7's website. The only place you can find is actually third parties that reference to the 404 link. So out of all the advisories ever worked on at Rap7, this is now the only one that's been deleted. So read into that whatever you will, but it felt a little bit like trying to bury it a little bit. So the good news is you can still find information about the stuff online. There's some other great resources about how the stuff works. But less good news, though, is that firewalls in general have gone from being the devices we bought to protect our networks to now being the most common entry point into our networks. So if you look at the Mandiant put out this great report looking at 2024 for most common initial access vectors that are part of incidents that they investigated. And the top 4 initial access vectors were all security products. People are breaking in through the Palo Altos, through the Vanti Pulse Secure, then another Vanti endpoint manager, and then through Fortinet products of various sorts like FortiClient. So the top 4 access vectors investigated by Mandiant in real breaches were all security products. A few days ago, a gentleman named Matthew Flanagan put out a really awesome white paper as part of B-Sides Canberra. I haven't seen this reference anywhere publicly yet, but it's fantastic, and it's called Panning for Gold. And you can imagine what it covers. It covers Palo Alto and PAN devices, but it's a lot of really interesting data there about how you can abuse the master key system, things like that. Definitely recommend reading that if you're curious about this. But one thing you'll notice again and again is that when you look at how devices are being breached in the last 2 years, you're seeing the same vendors pop up again and again and again. It's getting really hard to tell yourself, oh, if I just buy this other product, I'm going to be secure, when those vendors are effectively the most common way into your network. So why did the kind of endpoint model that we have fail? The short version is everything changed, right? We now have cloud, we have mobile, we work from home, we have wireless networks everywhere, we've got hyperscale, BYOD became a thing across the board. All of our endpoints now lean on having agents installed for EDR and zero trust. There's no longer kind of one big firewall blocking everything. And even if there is one big firewall, it's typically the way people are getting in, not the way that you're blocking it. So they're not necessarily helping you at all these days. We've also seen wireless networking become ubiquitous. And wireless networking kind of changes the game. Instead of it being kind of a hard, crunchy outside and a soft, chewy center, you can effectively bring the network to your target. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But when all this stuff was happening, the unmanaged devices were typically left behind. So while your endpoints, your corporate laptops were all getting fancy CrowdStrike agents installed, your vendor appliances, your virtual machines, your IoT devices, network switches, they're all just kind of being left there to rot. And there hasn't really been any kind of innovative security around those devices in a very long time. So you really have two classes of devices in your network. You've got the new ones that have kind of the agent-based security, the EDRs, et cetera, and then you have everything else, which is still poorly protected by that old kind of traditional model. A nice way to look at those IoT devices is consider them all, if it has a wireless interface on it, it's a wireless access point. That's just kind of the facts. If the device has an Ethernet port and it's got a wireless port, whether it's Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, LoRa, you name it, it's a wireless access point. There's some way or another you can turn that into a way into the network through the wireless segment. So for example, if you buy a brand new printer, for example, a Brother printer, it'll turn on the wireless by default. You just don't touch it, you plug it into the network, you start printing stuff, you're good to go. It's actually running a little mini access point that anyone can connect to, and these devices also have routing enabled by default. So you can actually use your printer as literally a wireless access point to get into your environment. So somebody who drives into your parking lot can basically point an antenna at the room, hop on the printer's wireless, use that to break into the printer, use the printer, then break into your network, et cetera. But this applies to everything. Laptops that have both wired and wireless cards, printers, of course, media servers, IoT gateways. Anything that has more than one port in it is effectively a gateway, and folks don't realize that those gateways undermine the rest of their security. One thing I love about printers in particular is that once you break into a printer, you get lots of other good stuff for free. So printers typically have credentials, because your printer is set up to email people, that you set up your SMTP credentials. So typically there's like either an Active Directory account or a Google Workspace account tied to your printer, and the password's actually hard-coded into the printer itself. And a great way to steal those passwords, you just go into the printer configuration and change the mail server from gmail.whatever.com to your own IP address, tell it to send an email, you authenticate yourself, and off you go, and you've got the password. So printers tend to be a fun target to tackle in terms of this type of attack, but they're far from the only one for sure. Another example that comes up a lot is developer laptops. If you have a developer laptop and they go to work, they plug into a docking station, they're now on the wired network, that's great. But they did not turn off the wireless network. They typically have both on at once. Now, if you're running, let's say, a Mac OS laptop, and you enable something like Docker on that, Docker is actually going to enable IP forwarding by default on that laptop. So your laptop is now effectively a router. Anybody on the wired side of the network that can talk to your laptop can route packets through that laptop into the wired network and back and forth. And that is the default configuration. So unless you're asking your team to turn off their wireless interfaces when they plug into your wired network, you're effectively creating Wi-Fi bridges all over the place. And this is the type of stuff that I focus on finding at work and that my friends focus on exploiting for a pen test. One of the neat things about wireless attacks is that the attacker can actually become the network. So we used to talk about, okay, it's a hard, crunchy center. Once you're in the middle, it's not very secure, but outside, it's okay. So if all your laptops, all your servers are part of this big secure network, well, you have to break into the outer network first before you really attack them. That's no longer true with wireless. Wireless attacks allow you to force someone's device to join your network. And there's a million ways you can do it. You can de-auth all the existing ones. You can do all kinds of fun tricks. You can give it like a 5 gig version of a 2.4 gig SSID instead. But there's all these different tricks that allow you to basically shuffle the network out from underneath the device. Now, when that happens, a lot of really interesting things kind of happen as a result. Let's say your laptop is on the VPN, and your laptop has a connection to the local printer, like whatever your printer is in your office. Somebody comes by, they spray your laptop with packets to de-auth, and then give you what looks like closer access point. Your laptop now joins a new access point. The VPN's still trying to connect in the background. It can't really connect. It's going to start timing out. But that connection you had to the printer, it still thinks it's open. It still thinks it's talking to port 445 of a network share or of a printer. It's going to keep authenticating just like it would before. It doesn't realize that the VPN is dead. Those two parts of the OS are not connected. So when the VPN side of a laptop or endpoint drops, it doesn't know that it's no longer safe to continue all the other things it's doing in the background. That communication keeps happening, and an attacker can basically accept those connections, do kind of an attacker in the middle account or attack, and use that to either get your credentials, crack your credentials, or relay that to a real target. Now, the early version of this was something called Car Metasploit, which was a lot of fun. Effectively ran a Karma Wi-Fi access point that would pretend to be every access point. And then when people joined your network, you then reflect the connection back to themselves. So anytime they browsed a web page, you'd say, yes, here's a web page, and put some UNC URLs into it to file shares. And the file shares would point back to themselves, or sorry, point to you, and then you'd point it back to them. And until, I want to say like 2016, 2017, that would actually let you PSExec on the machine's laptop from itself. You'd effectively make somebody authenticate to their own laptop, take over the connection, and start running commands. And you literally didn't have to exploit anything. That's just how it worked. So Microsoft finally kind of sort of fixed that by preventing you from being able to do a direct relay attack. So the challenge that your machine creates when someone tries to authenticate back to it says, no, that's my challenge, I'm not going to use that. The problem is that attack still works, it just through different mechanisms now. You can relay that target to a third-party server. So for example, you can use a laptop that you've hijacked to then authenticate to the public mail server for that company. You can also use it to relay between protocols. You can say, well, I'm going to take your inbound connection through SMB and then relay that back outbound through something like Kerberos or LDAP or something like that. And those relay attacks still work just fine. And then the attacker, of course, can take over the connection that you authenticated for them, and they have authenticated access to whatever your service is. So we haven't really solved these problems yet, and they tend to be pretty nasty because you're effectively pulling the rug on a device and replacing everything about it knows about the world with your own kind of malicious network. So a lot of folks will look at clouds and say, great, well, I put everything in the cloud now, I put everything in the container, therefore it's secure. There's a graphic here that was part of the Snowden disclosures, but effectively this is a picture of how Google Cloud works. And there's a little part right in the very middle of it where all of the TLS connections come in, and it says SSL added and removed here. And the point there is like they found a spot between Google's networks where they decrypted all the traffic, and they did really fast connection between 2 points, then they re-encrypted it. Well, if you're wiretapping things and you want to find the spot to attack, obviously you go find the spot where it's unencrypted. Now, every cloud instance, every container instance you deploy is very similar. You're not running TLS to every single node. You usually have a TLS landing on a load balancer or to one of the nodes in your Kubernetes cluster. Everything after that is just a clear text forward through HTTP. So we've kind of rebuilt the same hardened external soft chewy center model with clouds, with containers, with just about every other type of deployment we do. They all have similar properties. They all have very little security in the center. They all have all their real security on the outside. And all it takes is one of those internal containers being breached, one of those internal devices being breached in the cloud, to then get access to everything else. So if you're able to compromise one of the containers, you can then easily attack the sidecars. Something else you see very common is that when folks are deploying containers, they deploy these sidecar containers like Redis or Memcached or Postgres, these kind of database services, but they create them with a very like a hard-coded default password. And I don't know why they think it's OK now to have a default passwords like that, but it is not, and it's still not OK. So what happens in that case is, yeah, you may have a hard-coded password for setting up Postgres, and your application will use it. But if somebody's able to break into your application or break into another container in the same pod, they can now abuse that default credential to go take all the data out of your database. So just because it's running in a container doesn't mean you can be lax with the security and lax with the passwords. And we've really held these types of environments to a much different standard than we would if it was a traditional network. Something you often see here is IP forwarding as well. So anytime that you have a Kubernetes instance running or a cluster, whether it's Talos or K3 proxy or many other implementations of the stuff, you can typically relay connections to those other internal containers from outside. So if you have a Mac laptop, for example, you're running Docker desktop on it, you've got a bunch of containers behind it. If you're on the same network as the person's laptop, you can then route into the containers directly from that local system because of the way it's configured. And a lot of folks don't realize that those old school kind of layer 3, layer 2 attacks still work just fine for attacking cloud and container environments. So the new rules of parameters are a little bit different. We tell everyone that you should adopt zero trust. You should basically treat every device like its own hardened node. You should retire your SLVPNs. Not only are they annoying to manage, but they tend to get compromised constantly. You should restrict the management interfaces of all your firewalls. You really don't want to have your Palo Alto or your Fortinet management interface hanging out in the wind. We see that those get compromised all the time. You want to disable wireless on any network where it has a mix of wired and wireless networks. You really want to turn that wireless off. Good luck telling your entire team that when they plug into the network at work, they have to turn the wireless interface off. Like, I don't even know how you want to enforce that. But it's a huge problem, and yet no one's really addressing it. And then lastly, you want to harden not just your individual laptops, but also your containers, all your VPCs. You have to treat every one of these environments like all the different components are going to be attacked. You can't just assume that the outer layers will protect the rest of it. So next I'm going to talk about is user behavior. Users tend to be the scapegoat for everything wrong with security. Typically, you say, users don't click that, or we often talk about how users the way that you break into something. Like eventually, you just keep hammering a user for an MFA login prompt, and they say yes, fine, I'll let you in. Or you send them enough phishing emails, or you send them enough something, they will find a way into the network. So we've always treated users as the weakest link, and we've always said, well, the only way to fix users is to train them continuously, viciously. Put through as many trainings as you possibly can. And we know how well it works, which is that it doesn't. So the reason for this, though, if you go back to 2003, 2005 or so, before Chrome was our default browser everywhere, what was out there was terrible. Folks were using Internet Explorer 6 as their default browser. IE6 had so many vulnerabilities that if you could get an IE6 user to browse to any website you want, you're almost guaranteed to be able to run code on their system. There's so many ways you can do it. You had ActiveX, you had Java, you can use Silverlight, you can use Flash, you can use all these different techniques, Adobe PDF Reader plugins. There are so many different ways you can basically trigger code execution on a device running Windows Explorer that we almost just discounted the ability of the user to be defendable at all. We said if the user will go to your website, we're going to assume that you can break into them. That's just how bad these are. Now you fast forward a little bit, and now we're in a world where everything is based on Chrome. Like Microsoft gave up building its own secure browser, says we're Chrome now too. Unless it's a Word document, then it's IE still, but that's a kind of a different problem. So we're in a world now where we do feel like users are actually more hardened, that the tools they're using are actually stronger, that a little more defensible, but we haven't really changed how we thought about users. So early days, what did we do about these browser vulnerabilities being terrible? Well, we couldn't get the vendors to care. So I was working on the Metasploit project at the time. This is 2006. And we had so many vulnerabilities. We ran fuzzers for Internet Explorer, for Firefox, Safari, a bunch of other browsers back then. We had so many vulnerabilities. And we're just going what do we do with all these? We had 450 different 0 days for browsers. So we said, let's just give them all away. Let's just do one a day. So every single day, we just gave away a new browser 0 day. And then we went to the next day and so on. For an entire month straight, we're just dumping 0 days in browsers. Because at that point, it's ridiculous. The problem had gotten so bad, there's no way to solve it constructively other than just dumping them and seeing how people would react. So the results of all that is we still had hundreds of vulnerabilities left when it was all said and done, but it helped kickstart some major efforts. This was the beginning of the end of ActiveX, finally. And this is the time when ActiveX was required. If you're in South Korea, you legally had to use ActiveX in Internet Explorer because that was the only way you could authenticate using your government ID. So we helped take out things like the Java runtime, take out the QuickTime libraries, take out the PDF Reader plugins. So all the work we've done on the Metasploit side just to hammer these vulnerabilities repeatedly was a way to finally kind of drain the swamp a little bit of easy, low-hanging fruit. And it was useful, right? It had a good impact in terms of being able to make it overall security better for end developers. But at the end of the day, it kind of failed. The rules we set for users didn't really solve the problem. So while Chrome ate all of the endpoint security and attacks against major browsers are still technically a thing, they tend to be on the extreme ends. Either it's something that's their kind of low-risk vulnerability in a browser, it's pretty small, maybe like a cookie tracking thing, or it's a serious vulnerability in a web browser like Chrome that if someone exploits it, it must be a nation state. It must be somebody who chained 19 different vulnerabilities together. There's a recent bug bounty from Google for Google Chrome, and they paid out $250,000 for a single vulnerability. It was amazing. And that's probably if not the highest bug bounty ever, it's very close to it. And the reason for that is they not only found a vulnerability in Chrome, but they found a way to abuse the entire logic and containers, the individual containers between Chrome processes to then break out of it and then basically deploy a full-blown payload. So similar to Apple, if you're going to find a vulnerability in Apple's products these days, they're going to pay you a lot of money because you have to not just break through the browser level, you have to get out of the local sandbox, you have to target all sorts of other stuff to make that exploit successful. So we now have these really big bug bounty programs for these types of attacks. So in a lot of ways, we've made the endpoints more secure, mostly by killing everything that's not Chrome at this point. Security training has made a difference, but it's also kind of moved the target on us. Attackers are no longer going after the things that we're training users not to do. People still click stuff, and they're still going to click things no matter what we do. We didn't solve that problem. I don't know if you worked at a company where they did those really awful phishing campaigns where around the end of the year you'd get, log in here to get your bonus, or you free vacation days if you click here. But some of the ways that we did phishing training really just kind of burned people. They were they lost trust in the security team. They really got mad at their employers. It really yanked people around emotionally, and it wasn't really much fun. So we finally decided that's a bad idea, and we stopped doing those, hopefully. So if you're still doing those kinds of testings within your organization, tell them to please stop. So security has improved overall, but we've now seen attackers get even more creative with how they tackle stuff. And even this year, we've now seen a month of bugs, but instead of being a month of browser bugs, it's been a month of AI bugs. So there's so many vulnerabilities in all the AI tools that this company said, you know what, we give up. We're just going to post one every day for a while to let people understand how bad the situation is. And they did. By the time they got to the end of the month, they still had hundreds of vulnerabilities left across all these AI tools. That's just kind of how bad we are. So you can look at kind of where we are in terms of AI tool security, a lot like where we were in 2003 with browser security. So it failed because attackers really adapted. Attackers went from trying to get us to load attachments, to download malware directly, to click EXEs, to these new things that are a little bit trickier to stop. I don't know if anyone are familiar with click fix attacks. Click fix, file fix, download fix. Anybody got hand? Okay, these are hilarious. So what they do is they pop up a dialog on the user screen saying, I need you to hit Control L and then paste the clipboard and then hit enter, and that's going to help unlock this CAPTCHA. So prove you're not a robot by hitting Control L and then Control V. Now, if you're on Windows, what that'll do is open up a command prompt and then run the command. And the command's going to have PowerShell in it, and the PowerShell command's going to run some backdoors and gently backdoor your system. But these click fix attacks have actually gotten really successful. And the reason is they are often deployed on sites that are already trusted. So a common shopping website, for example, if it sees a Windows-based browser, it'll pop up a click fix attack. Or in cases where someone is typically using something like DocuSign or PDF Reader, PayPal invoices, things like that. They tend to basically proxy their attempts through these third-party services. So oftentimes you'll get an email from Google that literally is from Google that has the phishing message in it, and it's got a link to it. And if you click on that link, it'll actually be a phishing attack. But the entire infrastructure for that attack actually lives on Google's site. Someone created a OIDC portal on top of Google, and so if you have a rule in your company saying only click valid links, well, everything you just clicked is a valid link. Like, they've found a way to do their phishing attacks completely within the constraints that we told users to stay within. Something else a lot of us don't like to admit is that people in leadership, people on the technical side of security, like, we're just as likely to fall victim as anybody else. Cory Doctorow had this great post where he talked about how he got scammed, and I don't want to go into it and spoil the read for you a little bit, but there's assumptions you make as somebody who's been in security for a long time or been in technology for a long time, where you kind of want to give people the benefit of the doubt, or you think you know what's going on. Well, that same assumption can get you in trouble pretty quickly. If an attacker knows they're going after somebody who is a developer or who is a leadership at a company, they know exactly what strings to pull to be able to get your attention, to get you to do the thing you want to do. It's not just going after your non-technical users. So we've seen a lot of the supply chain attacks, especially recently going after developers. In this case, someone created a npm.js.login or something like that, kind of a new one of the GTLDs for npm. They phished one specific developer. They got about 15 of that developer's accounts, and then they inserted what basically became a worm into that account. Then every account every npm package that account owned pushed this new worm into that account, and that worm then basically spread around the internet for a while. So at one point in time, there's something like 600 or 700 packages were all being backdoored by this worm named after the Dune worm, which is fantastic. We finally saw our first real worm on the internet in many, many years. But the funny thing about this is it started off with a phishing attack, and it populated just because people were storing their credentials locally and automatically publishing packages. So just your .env file and your developer workstations were all that was required for this worm to propagate. So it doesn't matter how great your SDLC is if your developers are still going to do npm install and some random package they've never heard of before. So a lot of companies now are kind of scrambling, saying, okay, well, what do we do about our npm package security or PyPI package security? It's like, that's a good question. There's different companies that you can pay money to that'll filter them for you, but there's not really a great way to prevent a developer from trying out some new shiny tool. The one thing that'll make your developers riot more than anything else is telling them they can't try out new stuff. And that's, of course, the most likely way they're going to get compromised. So the kind of new rule for user behavior, it's not that different, but the idea is that users are still fallible. Like, they're still going to be targeted by people all the time. And they're fallible not because they're dumb, but because people are actually going after them all the time. And those users include your developers, they include your leadership, they include your technical people, they include your security team. There's a really funny set of, well, funny in retrospect, a series of phishing attacks a couple years ago where a lot of security researchers were being phished by North Korean attackers. So these North Korean attackers are saying, hey, I'm working on an exploit, can you help me out? Or is this a real bug or whatnot? And asking for help by these security researchers to look at the work and give them feedback. In reality, it's just backdooring their machines and stealing all their zero-day. So it doesn't matter who you are, even if you're a security researcher doing zero-day research, you can be targeted, and people have been successfully targeted through these kinds of attacks. So the only way to really get around it is plan for it. Like, assume that one of your leadership is going to be targeted, assume your developers will be compromised. What do you do next? How quickly can you detect it and respond? Cool. Last thing I want to talk about today is attacker behavior. So the current rule for attacker behavior, and you kind of see this all over the place, is we want to stop what attackers are actually doing. We want to do the 1% of attacks that people actually are exploiting. We don't care about the rest of it. If you get a list of 10,000 vulnerabilities in your vulnerability management and you're told to fix all of them, you're going to say, well, I can't. So what do I do instead? Well, maybe fix the ones that have the highest risks based on these voodoo risk weightings and whatnot. And so we try to look at exploitability data as one of the levers for that. If someone's actively exploiting a vulnerability, then obviously we want to fix that one first because people are actively exploiting it. That's the idea, right? That challenge is it doesn't really work that well in practice. So let's say you're having a lovely hike, you're in the woods with your friends, you're kind of walking around, you get close to the summit, and then a big brown bear pops out on the path. And then you see two little cubs joining the brown bear. Like, what do you do? Like, there's a bunch of right answers here about how you make yourself big and scream and bear spray and things like that. Then there's the joke, which is you don't have to run faster than the bear, you just have to run faster than your friend. And that type of logic is actually how we've tackled these types of vulnerabilities in security. We've said, no, you don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to wait for someone else to get exploited first and use that data to then drive your security program. So our entire security program that is built on exploitability is based on someone else getting eaten by the bear first. And one, that's not very polite, but two, it also just doesn't work. So how do you find evidence of exploitation? So if you're trying to build a security program, you want to say, I want to fix things that are being exploited. How do you go about actually doing that? Well, a common way to do it is look at the CISA known exploited vulnerabilities list. They've got this big list that when they see an attack being exploited in the wild, they put a new CVE on it, and there you go. It's a great way to do it. You can also read news articles. You can look at public tools and exploits. And these all assume that you have time to do this work. And oftentimes you don't have that time because the exploits are happening right now at this second. Now, if you're using the CISA KEV as your kind of line of what vulnerabilities you need to action, it's not going to work very well. You're already kind of behind the ball a little bit. The reason for this is CISA KEV requires every vulnerability that they respond to have a CVE. It can take 3 weeks from a vulnerability to be publicly known before even a CVE is allocated for it, and sometimes even much longer. You can see vulnerabilities will go by for months and years without getting a CVE allocated. A company called VulnShock right now is doing a great job of allocating CVEs for older vulnerabilities right now. And it's been funny to see folks saying, why are you allocating a CVE for something from 2019? And their take is, well, people are still exploiting it. Why wouldn't we allocate a CVE for it? So if you're looking at CISA as your line for what to fix, one, they're not going to allocate a CVE to a vulnerability for a long time. Two, their CVEs lag discovery by weeks. And three, CISA has to wait for the attack to be actually verified. They have to see real losses in the field, document those losses, investigate it before it gets added to their list. And I can say this with a little bit of confidence because we hired a section chief from CISA who works on my team now, and he told us exactly how it worked. He's like, CISA is not trying to be fast. CISA is trying to be correct. So if you're waiting for the CISA KEV to have a vulnerability added to it, you're far behind at this point. You are going to be part of the KEV data. So if you wait for the KEV, you will be part of the KEV data almost by definition. A lot of folks also think about the internet being a really big place. But OK, there's this huge internet out there. Why would someone attack me, right? Why would they go after my company, my mid-size, my larger, my this, my that? We think of the internet as being this kind of big, dark, empty ocean full of attacks. And you have to get really unlucky if you get hit before somebody else. Why would someone go after your organization? Well, the internet got really small. Like, we've gone from the internet being this kind of empty space where lots of dead IP space, not used very much, to you can pick any IP address out of a hat right now from a valid IPv4 address, type the word ping on your laptop, and get a response about 1 out of 5 times. There's that many systems online right now. We've actually 1 out of 5 possible v4 addresses is live right this second somewhere in the world. If you've got 20 minutes and $5, you can throw an exploit at the entire IPv4 internet right now really quickly. Tools like ZMAP, Masscan, et cetera, some of these cheaper virtual hosting providers, they make it really fast to go deliver one exploit precisely to everything on the internet at once, really quickly. Services like Shodan and Census, they already have a list of everything on the internet. They already know everything that's out there already. They've been tracking your internet, whether you have or not, and your internet exposed assets for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So if you're trying to target a company, you're not going to start off with a port scan or this or that. You're going to start off by looking at the existing data that's out there and doing a search query. So if an attacker's trying to figure out what you have, you're not going to find out about it. You're not going to see a port scan. You're going to see them querying a third-party service for data that's already been out there for months, and that's going to tell them, oh, you've got a NetScaler, you've got a Citrix device of various sorts, et cetera. So something else we see is that attackers are actually no longer competing to, we talk about every vulnerability being a race. You're trying to race the attackers to fix the vulnerability. But it's more than that. Attackers are actually racing themselves to exploit the vulnerability against each other. Oftentimes, attackers are trying to exploit the vulnerability and then kick out other attackers first so they can keep access to your systems. And we see this play out in real time. So a really interesting sequence of events happened this month. Early this month, last month, September 4th, and Gray Noise put out an advisory saying, we're seeing people targeting Cisco ASAs. And then on September 8th, a news post got posted about it, saying, hey, people are footprinting these ASA devices. Maybe someone's about to exploit them. Maybe there's a new vulnerability out there. Fast forward to September 25th, and CISA puts out an emergency advisory saying, yes, people are actively exploiting 3 new zero-day and Cisco ASAs. So we're able to determine that, yes, this surge in scanning and detection 3 weeks ago really was going after a brand new vulnerability and started to put 2 and 2 together. So our ability to predict exploitation is actually starting to get better based on having this kind of smaller version of the internet that we can all watch. So end of the day, attacker behavior really assumes that your attackers are already, your assets are already cataloged and attackers are already waiting. Like you're no longer trying to wait for something to show up on the CISA Kev. You're trying to make sure that you know about your exposure at the same time an attacker does or before they do, so you can respond faster. And that's really your only way out of this. You can't just wait for something to get added to a Kev list and fix it. You need to know about it well before it gets there and fix it before anyone else knows about it on your network. And fortunately, as defenders, you have great visibility into your own environment, and that's the way to do it. So quick summary here, your challenge, the fundamentals still matter, right? We still have the same types of problems, unique passwords, like hard and crunchy outer shells, soft chewy centers, things like that. The way that you can win is to focus on your preparedness, your resiliency, and your response speed. If you can't respond quickly, you're not going to be able to get ahead of these things. You're going to end up on the CISA Kev list. You're going to be the data point everyone else looks at and say, oh, they got exploited. I don't want to be them. But it's always worth questioning our assumptions. If there's a rule in your environment that you think is dumb, go question it. Take it apart. Say, what if we just don't believe that anymore? What if that's no longer true? So you're not just the security professionals, IT professionals, CISOs. You're also the architects of the future. You're the ones defining what the future looks like and what those rules look like to your organizations. So if there's a rule out there that's dumb, that's not working, it's up to you to say, hey, this thing doesn't make sense anymore. This is something from 20 years ago. We don't need that anymore. We need to do something different. Here's what different looks like for our organization. So it's always worth double testing those assumptions. It's always worth challenging it. So I kind of want to leave you with the challenge. Like, can you find a rule in your organization that is dumb, that doesn't work, that you can redefine, that you can challenge, that you can break, and in doing so improve your security? That's it. Thank you.